Hello everyone and welcome back to another pre-recorded lesson video. Hopefully you've been keeping up with, lesson 1 and lesson 2 in the past 2 days. I know lesson 1, there was no pre-recorded lesson video for that, but I did upload 2 background videos of World War I and 2 articles that I wanted you to read. It was basically, the last 2 lessons was basically building up your knowledge of World War I and figuring out what countries fought in World War I and why they got involved, right? The events that led to them joining World War I and basically the events that also led to the end of the war. And we're sort of going to do some background info on World War I again, but not really of specific countries, but mostly looking at the people that fought in World War I. And then we're also going to be starting the book today. So woohoo, very exciting lesson. I'm very excited to get started on this book and get y'all reading it just so you can see what it's like, see how the rest of the module is going to be, okay? So without further ado, let's get started. So the intro for this lesson is just 2 pictures that I want you to, do the same strategies that we've been doing for, visual art, right? Noticing what's happening in it. The first thing that you notice, what draws your attention immediately, looking left to right, up and down, the drill, right? So looking at these pictures, you see a group of soldiers on the left, and then you see a poster on the right? So let's look at the picture with the people in it, the group of people on the left first. You see a group of people, standing in a line, soldiers, they're probably new. You see an official looking soldier right here. He's probably the one in charge, or he's maybe the recruiter, right? And looking at these soldiers, they look very young, in my opinion. Some of these soldiers look very young. They look very new. They look like they don't know what they're about to get into, right? They look a little bit scared. We're going to get into the age of these soldiers and everything like that later on. And this poster, it says Britain wants you. This poster sort of reminds me of, that like the Sam Houston poster, basically the American one where it's like, we want you, right? This is basically saying, Great Britain wants you to join the army, right? Come join the army, fight this great, war and help your country, right? So this is basically the recruiting process of the soldiers for World War I, right? So moving on, that's going to lead us into the rest of the lesson. So the learning goals, or the big things that I want us to focus on, is I want us to focus on the experience of war and how that develops a larger idea about war's impact on society. We're going to see what World War I did to the people that were involved and society as a whole, right? And then I want us to also look at not just British teenagers, but just teenagers in general during the war, right? The characters that we're going to read about in the All Quiet on the Western Front, they're very young. They are around 19 to 20 years old, right? Majority of the characters. So they're very young. All they've known up to this point is just war, right? So that's what I want y'all to think of whenever we go through this lesson, okay? So the important questions, the essential question is, so how do literature and art illuminate the effects of World War I? And the focusing question is, why did countries and individuals join World War I? We're going to be able to answer this focusing question this lesson, okay? So this is a quick video that I want y'all to watch. I also uploaded this into the folder, right? So just watch this video. I think it's like a 1-minute video. It's basically telling you the German and English side of, people enlisting. Enlisting is basically means signing up for the army. So it's basically some of the reasons they gave for joining the army and how young those soldiers were. Okay, the person in this video, I think they were 16, right, whenever they signed up, and the recruiter in that video says, "Hey, I can only sign up 19-year-olds, right? Maybe come back tomorrow whenever you're 19, okay, or come back whenever you're 19." So the soldier that was 16, comes back the next day and says, "Hey, I'm 19," and the recruiter winks at him and says, "Okay, welcome to the Army," right? That is how this process really went. A lot of young soldiers signed up for the Army, and they got in because they lied about their age. Recruiters knew that they lied about their age. They just wanted, soldiers. They needed more people to join and fight, right? It wasn't the most moral choice, but a lot of soldiers joined anyway, right? We're going to get into the exact numbers of the amount of young underage soldiers that joined, okay? So this is a article that I'm going to link in the folder and upload there. The article is titled "The Teenage Soldiers of World War One." It's basically going into how many underage, soldiers fought in World War One, right? They're not even really soldiers. At this point, they're just kids, right? They're under 18. They're not, what we've known as the age as whenever you're sort of considered an adult, right? So as you saw in this paragraph that I pulled from the article, it says as many as 250,000 boys under the age of 18 served in the British Army during World War One. Right, that is an incredible number. It even says they learned the true meaning of fear. A lot of these kids signed up because it was just the thing that everyone was doing. There was a lot of pressure on them from society to sign up. We're going to get into that society pressure and the peer pressure that they felt, right? But the fact that 250,000 boys just from Great Britain alone signed up is an astounding figure. And it really makes you think about if, you were living during wartime and, there's a lot of pressure for you to join, would you join, right? If you were around their age, like some of these, kids were 15, 16 whenever they joined the Army, right? So they were barely lived their life, and they're going to go in to fight a war, and it's going to change their lives forever. Okay, I'm going to show you some examples of people that were underage and that fought in the war. Okay, so this one's Cyril. He was underage. I think he was 16 years old, but he fought and he actually survived the war. He was one of the really few lucky ones that actually survived. And he says the bloodshed that he witnessed in France, right, turned him into he despised the military after that for the rest of his life. He, in one letter home, he basically criticized and cursed out the British commander, Field Marshal Earl Haig. Cyril, he was just a young kid going into the army, right? He didn't know any better, really, right? He joined because he thought it was the right thing to do, and that war changed him for the rest of his life. It changed his mind. It basically turned him into a completely different person. The amount of bloodshed and loss and death that he saw, right? We're going to go into a little bit more of why they joined and what else happened to the soldiers that signed up, okay? So in this one, this was another soldier that joined. I think they were 16 or 17. So on the 29th of December 1915, Abbey was caught in a German mine explosion. The enemy had tunneled under the trench where he was stationed. He was wounded and suffered what was then simply called shock. Right? Shock is going to keep coming up in that book, in the book that we're reading, okay? In today's military lexicon, it would be described as combat stress or post-traumatic stress disorder. Y'all have probably heard of post-traumatic stress disorder. A lot of soldiers have it. Even a lot of regular people have it as well. If you go through a lot of trauma, you will most likely get post-traumatic stress disorder. Okay, so this soldier, Abbey, he was caught in an explosion, right? He was fighting in the trenches, and he was caught in an explosion, and he basically suffered shock from it. He suffered the post-traumatic stress disorder. There's a lot of mental wear and tear. He had a lot of fatigue. And if you remember from the trenches, the people in the trenches spent hours and hours in the trenches just digging, and then they could end up in the trenches for weeks at a time, right? Just in these narrow like holes that they dug for miles, and they're just sitting in there. There's rats and disease everywhere. There's dead bodies around, right? And they can't move or they're going to get shot at, right? So you had to imagine all the mental wear and tear, how tired you constantly are, barely being able to sleep, and then you hear all these explosions and gunshots, right? And then an explosion happens really close to you. It's gonna rattle you, right? A lot of people can't handle that, especially whenever they're only 15 or 16, right? They haven't lived a whole lot of life at that point, and all they've known for a good part of their life is war, right? So that's exactly what happened to a lot of teenage soldiers. The ones that were lucky enough to make it, they suffered a lot of mental health issues, right? So I want to get us into the question of why did people volunteer? We just read about why, or the amount of young people that volunteered and what happened to the young people, what made the young people volunteer, right? So this is from another article that I pulled that I'm going to upload into the today's folder, right? So this one says, over the next few weeks, thousands of young men came forward. When the first grim news of casualties and of the retreat from Mons arrived in late August, more volunteered, and after the fall of Antwerp in early October, there was a renewed surge. On some days, more than 10,000 men enlisted. So there were thousands and thousands of people constantly volunteering, right? And when they hear news of all the deaths that are happening, all the losses that the British Army are taking, there's still thousands of men still volunteering. Even in one day, some more than 10,000 men volunteered. They enlisted, right? They joined the army, and none of the bad news affected them because they thought they were fighting a righteous war, right? They thought that the war was for a good cause and that was a good thing, right? That the government for the Great Britain marketed it that way, that they were on the right side of history, that everyone should join, right? It was the moral thing to do, right? And that there was really no other option, right? And then whenever you see, everyone else around you fighting and joining, you feel like, maybe you should be doing it too, right? It's that peer pressure, right? If everyone around you is telling you to do it and that it's the right thing to do, you're more than likely to do it, right? And you have to think again that these soldiers that volunteered, they were 15, 16. They really didn't know any better, and so whenever you have all this outside influence on you, you sort of just fall into that, right? So the next one is, by Christmas 1914, hundreds of thousands had come forward, and this continued well into 1915. Men from all social classes and all areas of Britain volunteered. Others who were overseas in August 1914 traveled thousands of miles to get back and enlist, right? That's absolutely crazy. People that weren't even in the country, right? They were maybe on vacation or they had a job in a different country, right? They moved away from Great Britain. They came back to be able to enlist and join the army. There is a term that we looked at in the last lesson that sort of described this, and it's patriotism and nationalism, right? That feeling that you have pride for your country, right? That you're happy to be a citizen from that country. This is an example of patriotism, and this is also an example of nationalism, right? Where you think that, hey, my country is great, my country is better than a lot of other countries out there. My country is definitely better than the countries we're fighting against. I want to fight for us, right? That was a big cause for a lot of people joining, was that sense of patriotism and nationalism. Okay. And this paragraph is talking about the social pressure, the peer pressure that these young soldiers and normal age like adults felt whenever they joined. It was indeed this growing social pressure which helped to maintain the flow of volunteers well into 1915. The painter Stanley Spencer and the poet Edward Thomas, who both volunteered in July 1915 after months of indecision, are good examples. When reluctantly the government introduced conscription in March 1916, it found no great reservoir of manpower to tap. A high percentage of those conscripted appealed for exemption and had to be coerced into service. So this is basically talking into the social pressure that a lot of these soldiers felt. They were sort of peer pressured into joining. A lot of their parents, for these younger teenage kids that were maybe thinking about joining, a lot of these parents pressured them, saying, "Hey, it's the right thing to do. Like even parents were telling these kids to go join, and for a lot of people, parents are a big influence on their lives, right? So that is why a lot of these kids ended up joining, and also the society pressure, right? It was from apparently um, like maybe other kids your age that were thinking about joining, and they actually did end up enlisting. Maybe they start picking on you because you're not thinking about joining, or you're being hesitant on joining, right? Apparently it was also a personal life killer. Like if let's say you're a 15-year-old boy and you're not thinking about joining, a lot of the girls at that time would give them feathers, saying that they were basically a chicken at that point, right? Saying, hey, why aren't you joining? All everyone else your age is joining. They're being a man and fighting for their country. There's that social pressure that um, made these kids join the army and fight. And a lot of these young soldiers, these teenage soldiers, felt like they were doing the right thing, and they were happy. They were proud to be fighting for their country. But after the war, and after seeing all the death and uh, bloodshed that they saw, it definitely changed their minds. It turned them into a completely different person. There's if you ever watch a lot of history shows or movies, a lot of soldiers say that they were never the same after the war. Okay, so I just wanted to give you a information about the amount of young kids that fought in the war, and what made them volunteer and what made a lot of other people volunteer, right? And also to go back for this paragraph, my bad. The word conscription is a mandatory, making people join the army, right? Where they have no choice, right? So the government eventually said, "Hey, everyone from this age and up has no choice. You have to join the army," right? So I wanted that's why I wanted to go over all that information before we start the book, okay? Because a lot of the characters in this book are very young, and they have a certain mindset um, of war and why they're going. A lot of them are very proud to be fighting, but near the end of the book, you're slowly going to see that change in them. From we saw from the soldier Abby and Cyril that we just read about in those articles. You're going to see that change in these characters as well. Okay. So book time. So remember the online book? I actually created a new folder called Online Books folder. That book is found there if you don't have the physical copy. So I want you to click on this link and watch this video and read aloud. If you don't want to read the book yourself, because it is a little bit of a harder read. It's a tougher read than what the crossover was. A lot of these names are very difficult to pronounce. So if you want, you can watch this video and just follow along. What's really cool about this video is the text is right here while the person is reading it. So you can easily follow along that way as well. Okay, so what I want y'all to do, if you're just going to be watching the video and following along, watch it until 25 minutes and 13 seconds in the video. That is the mark for the end of chapter 1. I just want y'all to read chapter 1 today, okay? And if you're just reading the physical copy and you want to read it by yourself, then obviously just read chapter 1, by yourself, okay? And, I want y'all to, while you're reading, just pause from time to time to just go back to what you read, and basically summarize it. Like, just ask yourself, what did I just read? What is happening in that, part of the text I just read, right? Constantly do that while you're reading so that you can keep up and you understand what you're reading, right? Because there's a lot of times where you just read for a good bit and then you stop and you say, what did I just read about, right? I just forgot, right? So just do that while you're reading, okay? So after you're done with that, I want you to come back to this video and we can talk about the main characters, right? So obviously, you could either stay and finish out the rest of this video to know more about the characters and go read chapter 1, or you can go read chapter 1 and come back to this video. It's up to you. But the first this is the main character. His name is Paul Baumer, right? And this is a picture of him right here. He was actually a real person. So Paul Baumer is a young German soldier fighting in the trenches during World War One. He's the main character. He's the narrator of the novel. The book is told from his point of view. He is a very kind, compassionate, and sensitive young man. I believe that he is 19 years old. And slowly throughout the book, you're going to see him change from being a kind, compassionate, sensitive young man to a very detached, very cold-hearted person. He loses a lot of his emotions. Okay, that's because all the bitterness and all the death and all the bloodshed that he saw throughout the war. Okay, so but yeah, this is Paul Baumer. Next is a list of supporting characters. These are some of Paul's best friends and in his group, during in the army. And you have to remember something, that these are German soldiers. They're all German. We're reading from the German perspective. Okay, so Paul Baumer is German. All these characters are also German. So first up, right here, this is Stanislaus, or Kat, or Katminski, as he is known. Okay, so he is a soldier belonging to Paul's company. He is Paul's best friend in the army. Kat, as he is known, is 40 years old at the beginning of the novel and has a family at home. He is a resourceful, inventive man and always finds food, clothing, and blankets whenever he and his friends need them. He is the oldest of Paul's friends that he has made in the army, okay? Next one in the bottom left is Albert Kropp. He is one of Paul's classmates who serves with Paul in the second company. The second company is the branch of the army that they're fighting with. Their company, their regiment. Albert Kropp is an intelligent, speculative young man. Kropp is one of Paul's closest friends during the war. His interest is analyzing the causes of the war. That leads to many of the most critical anti-war sentiments in the novel. He has a very, very different viewpoint of war. Okay, and you're going to see that throughout the book. Next one up is Mueller. He is one of Paul's classmates again. Mueller is a hard-headed, practical young man, and he is also one of Paul's closest friends. He's a part of Paul's group. Okay, and the bottom right is Theoden. Okay, he's one of Paul's friends in the second company. He's in the same group as the rest of the characters. Theoden is a wiry young man with a voracious appetite. He can eat a lot. And whenever we read the book, he bears a deep grudge and hatred against Corporal Himmelsdoss. Okay, so these are just some of the supporting characters that you're going to keep reading about. They're going to pop up a lot in the book because they are Paul's closest friends. Okay, so keep a lookout for them. Okay, but they should have already been introduced in chapter 1, and they're just going to keep coming up more and more throughout. Chapter 1 is basically introducing the characters, introducing at what point in the war they are, and what their mindset is at this point, and we just keep going from there. Okay, but I want you to go read chapter 1. That's the most important thing that I want you to do today. There is a quiz on the course homepage about World War I and the background knowledge, basically what we did the last 2 days. And if you have any questions, thoughts, concerns, please let me know. But the most important thing I want y'all to take away from this lesson is reading chapter 1 and finishing that quiz on the course homepage, because that is your first grade for these second 9 weeks, okay? But if you don't have any questions, then I will see you here for the next lesson video, okay? Bye.